The recording has started.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee, episode 21st. We have a very distinguished guest today. For sake of record, today is Saturday, February 13th. It's around 6:15 a.m. in United States, East Coast time. And our guest is joining from Melbourne, Australia, where it is 10:15 p.m. We have Admiral Anup Singh, who retired as Commander-in-Chief of Eastern Naval Command of Indian Navy. Since his retirement, he has led a very active life. He is Director of Strategic Studies at Society for Indian Ocean Studies. He's also a Senior Fellow at Delhi Policy Group, and he is affiliated with several think tanks in India. He is widely published, invited as a guest on various platforms. We will be having a conversation with Admiral Anup Singh on the Red Sea Conundrum. What are the geopolitical implications? As we know that Houthi rebels based in Yemen are making drone strikes against merchant vessels, commercial shippings. And Indian Navy has got also involved in providing some safety and security. So that is the focus of our discussion today. Welcome to you, Admiral Anup Singh. We are very glad that you are able to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. My pleasure.
So looking at this whole problem, the war in Middle East this time started on October 7th. And late October, early November, these attacks started, drone attacks on commercial shipping. The United States gathered a multilateral coalition naval protection force called, Operation Prosperity Guardian. So let's hear from you. What are your thoughts about this whole problem and the response of the international community?
Okay. I keep talking about the maritime economy, not only in the Indian Ocean, but across the oceans of the world, and maritime security, in particular in the Indo-Pacific. And I've always maintained that man is primarily a continental creature and with his feet on terra firma. So other than that 0.05% of the entire population, which is familiar with the seas, because either professionally or otherwise, they are connected to the merchant navy or the war-fighting navy, or are in sailing boats just for leisure. Nobody else realizes generally that almost 40% of global GDP and national GDPs, even of some landlocked countries, are dependent entirely on the seas, because there is no way to transact goods except by sea, because of A, economies of scale, B, because certain volumes and weights can only be carried by sea. Now, that being so, there is a very serious problem insofar as the Indian Ocean is concerned, and it's been so historically. Despite being the smallest water body in the world compared to the Atlantic and the Pacific, it is the most critical trade route, because whether one wants to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific or vice versa, there is no alternative but to go through the Indian Ocean. And it is complicated by the fact that despite being the smallest of the three oceans, the only access routes are through choke points, starting with a half choke point in the Cape of Good Hope, and full choke points in the Mozambique Channel, the Strait of Bab el Mandab, the Suez Canal, the Persian Gulf, the Malacca, Sunda, and Lombok Straits, and Mumbai-Vetar Straits. These 9 choke points are the only access and exit routes to this ocean. It has no wide gateways. In fact, something which should never happen in an ocean happens in the Indian Ocean, that you've got a roof over its head provided by the Indian Peninsula and by Middle East. With these constraints, it becomes very, very sensitive when it comes to any non-state actor trying to carry out acts which are meant for its own profit, for their own profit, or state actors. So whether it is piracy or terrorism or narco-terrorism or drug running, gun running, or as you are seeing, proxy war by the Houthis, it affects the world economy. It is so bad that one realizes only when incidents like this take place that almost 12 to 15% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal and has to go through the Red Sea. Now the Houthis are carrying out these attacks, starting with the first attack on 15th of November, which has meant that most big ticket companies and container carriers and oil carriers which are destined to go towards the Malacca Straits are preferring to go around the Cape of Good Hope, which means 12 to 15 days of extra voyage, which means a minimum of $1 million worth of extra fuel, and time of 12 to 15 days extra is money. Patience is not. The world shipping is therefore finding it very difficult to keep up with the same prices for freight, because insurance companies immediately on incidents of this nature, during incidents of this nature, and in piracy, they hike up their premiums. So insofar as geopolitics goes, it has made a very, very tough situation for those countries whose livelihood depends on the seas, for insofar as trade, import and export trade is concerned.
So Houthi rebels, their situation is very complex. They are called Houthi rebels, but they are de facto controlling the Yemenis government.
Yes.
So they are, in a way, state actors, although nobody recognizes them, except maybe for Iran, from where they are getting support. But for all practical purposes, they have been fighting a war with Saudi Arabia for the last 8 years or so. It's a bloody war. And they have come out in open that we have a strategic objective, that is to defeat Israel in this Gaza-Israel war. And apart from United States, gathering this naval protection force, not much has been achieved because the attacks still continue.
So as I said in one of my sub answers, that it is asymmetric warfare. It is proxy war. And I think our mind goes back to the 60s when Che Guevara started what is called, what is today being called asymmetric warfare, in the sense that it is the cheapest form for a have-not or for someone who wants to win against a regular army. Now the Houthis have found it so convenient. One hears that they are being either funded or being provided with weapons and other arsenal from a particular country, which has been financially and politically supporting them. They have found it so convenient to wage this war against an unknown enemy, because the unknown being the fact that they do not even try and find out which flag a particular merchant ship is flying. Yesterday's news was that for the first time they've carried out attack at 2 merchant ships carrying cargo for Iran. Unthinkable. they obviously did not even realize that they are going to their mentor or their sponsor. This is the kind of problem that happens in uneducated non-state actors who have not been trained to fight, who have not been educated on the principles of warfare, and they've almost gone out of control. Now, the term that I used, asymmetric warfare, actually applies to a situation where one does not have the wherewithal or the money or a regular army, and it is much cheaper to wage war where it is not really intended, where it is not really supposed to be. For this, an example that I could give is that some of the drones are costing merely $30,000 to $50,000. And imagine the US Navy initially carried out neutralization of some of these drones and some of the ballistic missiles that were fired by these Houthis with missiles, when the anti-aircraft and anti-missile missiles, which are costing almost $2 to $3 million a piece. That is the kind of senseless warfare that is being waged by the Houthis.
So some of these drones, I'm told, they cost as little as $3,000 to $6,000.
Yes, true.
Now, it's not just Houthis. It looks like that Somali pirates have again become active in that region. So that adds another complexity of layer of complexity.
That's right. One of the fears that we had during the years 2006 to 2012, when Somali piracy was at its peak, was that if some terrorists and drug runners along the Makran coast, called the Hash Highway, the Americans still call it the Hash Highway, and they have some of the combined maritime forces, one of the task forces fighting this menace. The greatest fear that we people had at that time, the Americans, the Indians, the Japanese, the Russians, all those who were carrying out surveillance and patrolling against piracy along the international transit route, was that if by any chance maritime terrorists, so-called non-state actors, but some of them belong to a particular state, were to get mixed up with pirates and seek the assistance of pirates to go and board a particular ship and thereafter hijack it, and then carry out either suicide missions or guided missions by that merchant ship, this world will see no light at the end of that tunnel, the economic tunnel and the political tunnel, geopolitical tunnel. Now, piracy is again woken up because of the situation created by the Houthis. And this is where I said that choke points are the worst things to have in a water body. And the choke point there is the Bab el Mandab between Djibouti and Eritrea on one side and Yemen on the other. It is so narrow and constricted, and it is so densely full of traffic, merchant ship traffic, coming in and going out of the Suez Canal, that it is so easy for them to ping on targets which do not expect any problem other than navigation.
So if Houthi rebels have started to attack Iranian vessels, does Iran not have a hold on them because they've been providing them support financially and otherwise? In fact, their drones are of Iranian origin.
Yes.
So one would think that Iran would take some action. In fact, there was a case in which Indian Navy had to, INS Vishakhapatnam had to come to the assistance of a merchant vessel
Yes.
that was being sailed by Iranian and Pakistani sailors.
Yes.
So would Iran not take any action or let the situation continue?
All these drone strikes are unthinkable unless there is a vessel which is directing the assault platform, whether it is ashore in Yemen or it is a ship, which could be a dark vessel, as we call it. And it has been rumored that it is probably an Iranian vessel which gives guidance on the target for a drone attack to be carried out in a particular position. Some of these drones, which are not very expensive, are also known, the long-range drones, are also known to have mid-course guidance through satellites. So it is well nigh possible that the vessel which is giving them guidance has made a mistake itself, not having realized that even if the vessel was not flying an Iranian flag, as you know, many merchant ships fly flags of convenience today, and they are chartered for carrying cargo for any country. That it made a mistake, the guiding vessel, and it directed the assault platform manned by the Houthis to launch a drone attack on that particular target. Now, all this will, if at all, that country is involved in what has been rumored all this while since the 15th of November, then of course they will have to carry out a lot of soul searching and perhaps clamp down on some of the assaults that have been carried out, having faced the music themselves.
Now, this 20 nation, protection force that United States has gathered, India was invited. India politely declined because the policy of government of India is never to join any non-UN
That's right.
supported force.
That's
But
right.
India stepped up to the plate. India
Yes.
has actually commissioned 12 naval ships, that are doing a very creditable job. Do you have any comments on Indian response to this regional security problem?
I think we are absolutely right from the beginning, from non-aligned movement edition 1.0 till now, in not having joined any force or any proposed coalition of this nature. You'll recall that in 2003, when the United States sent a delegation to India, a State Department high-level delegation, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee chaired a cabinet meeting seeking views, and thereafter he decided and prevailed upon the cabinet in not joining that coalition of attack on Iraq, the Gulf War II. And we were so much wiser in not having joined. After all, we have had a policy, and rightly so, that unless there is a UN resolution and there is a recognizable threat to the entire world, and the UN says that we must act against a particular nation, India will not join forces. So we've done the right thing. And in keeping with that, for example, today there are joint strikes being carried out by the US and the UK forces against Houthi camps, Houthi sites, Houthi operational sites in northwest Yemen. India will certainly not like to join any of those initiatives, because it is not our policy to carry out attack on any other state unless that state has waged war against us, which has happened twice in our case with our neighbors, where it is perfectly legal and perfectly right to carry out an assault. So we have had since 2017 a method of deployment of our warships under the name mission-based deployments. A couple of ships have always been positioned in the Persian Gulf, in Central Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean, the Malaccas and the Lombok Straits, and so on. And these ships are always diverted. This time, when it happened on the 15th of November, with that vessel Chem Pluto, we had to immediately dispatch a couple of destroyers, not just frigates or corvettes, because we knew that we will have to have sufficient endurance on those platforms and sufficient self-defense weaponry as well as offensive weaponry to neutralize such drones. before they carry out attack on anybody else. And therefore, it was not just mission-based deployments, but add-on deployments by some very powerful vessels which have been there. And that has, I think, only added to our credibility and added to our heft insofar as the maritime domain in the Indian Ocean is concerned.
So I believe there are 12 ships deployed there in that region, providing regional safety and security, maritime security. So that actually brings India into a major role in the Indian Ocean as well as in the Persian Gulf. But if you look at what is happening, China has a base in Djibouti, but China is missing in action.
Yes.
You want to comment on that?
I think there is a very stark example of the serious trouble that Sri Lanka went into, the economic problem that Sri Lanka went into 2 years ago. Did China put its head above the water? Not for a penny, not for a peanut. Who went to their rescue? India with $3.8 billion. Whether it was line of credit, whether it was direct payment, whether it was immediate supply and diversion of critically needed diesel and other petroleum products from India to to Colombo. So we don't have to sort of, tickle the Sri Lankans to say who came to your assistance. Was it the Chinese or Indians? But they understand it themselves, and the world is watching. The same thing applies now. The Chinese are known for this. But there is yet another aspect that I want to comment upon. Except for what happened yesterday with 2 Iranian vessels, I think it is no coincidence that no Chinese flagged or Chinese cargo carrying vessel has been attacked by drones. So also is a fact with no Russian vessel having been attacked, but that may well be just coincidental. But there is not a single Chinese vessel that has been attacked by the Houthis. So we know that relations between China and the country which is known to be a sponsor of the Houthis have been extremely warm. Yet Iranian cargo vessels were attacked, but there is no Chinese vessel that has been attacked till now. Indian vessels have been attacked. Other flagged vessels have been attacked. So insofar as action by the Chinese is concerned, it is no surprise at all. Just no surprise. Whether anything is involved economically or otherwise, the Chinese do not put their head above the water.
So around 2006, 2007, when the Somali piracy was becoming, international problem, China had deployed its planned vessels in the Indian Ocean, claiming to contribute to the regional maritime security and safety. And that was their rationale for getting actually a base in Djibouti. And while this problem is happening, Chinese research vessels are visiting Maldives.
Yes.
And apparently it's an unconfirmed news that they have purchased an island from Maldives for $4 million. So what do you think about Chinese intention? What is their game plan? On one hand, they claim that they have their assets, naval assets are positioned to provide regional maritime security and protect free and open Indo-Pacific and, secure the trade routes and develop a naval base. But when push comes to shove, they are missing in action.
It's a very interesting case, and I think it is almost similar to the fact that between Henry Kissinger and President Nixon, with the assistance of Pakistan in 1971, They made a pact with Mao Zedong, and in 1972, as you know, the first state visit took place, and they shook hands.
Yes.
The Americans have not stopped repenting that they finally woke up a sleeping giant. It is actually in the same vein. There is this business of Djibouti. Unfortunately, in August of 2008, a Chinese vessel was attacked by the pirates. And the Indian Navy, which had already positioned one of its frigates in patrolling the international transit route of about 580 nautical miles in the Gulf of Aden, went to its rescue. Its helicopter took off immediately, carried out attack against the skiff and the mother boat, and rescued the Chinese vessel. The Chinese, for the first time, thanked India, and it came out in the international press as well as on the net. And they felt very embarrassed that such a large and powerful country, and they could not protect their own merchant ships, they were not there. A similar incident took place in November of 2008, but that was an attempted hijack. That is the time that the Chinese decided to send not one, but a group of 3 ships under a task force called Anti-Piracy Task Force. And one of those 3 ships was a logistics support ship. Now you can imagine that they sent this task force 5,000 nautical miles away from the southernmost base on mainland China, somewhere near Hainan, even though the ship must have come from north of Hainan. But the least distance to the Gulf of Aden is about 5,000 nautical miles. It was not easy, and the Chinese obviously were under 2 minds. Why should they spend so much money and send vessels to patrol when there are others looking after their interests? But they were embarrassed, and therefore they sent this task force. Till this date, there is a task force on job, on task. And I do not remember exactly what serial number of this task force is. Every 3 months, they turn around those ships. Every other country, including the EU Naval Force, the Indian Navy, the US Navy once in a while used to send their ships, the Russian Navy, and the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. They have sent only 1 ship. Nobody can afford more than 1 ship. The Chinese sent 3 ships. And when they decided to send 3 ships, it was in the end of 2008 after the second incident. They suddenly realized that this is a golden opportunity to show legitimate presence over there, and simultaneously started talking to Djibouti. And they cited to Djibouti government, to the president of Djibouti, the case of Camp Lemonnier, and a French naval base that had existed for a long time, to say that the Americans and the French have had bases, camps over there. However, the Chinese being given, and we'll offer you much more insofar as lease rent is concerned. So at $100 million a year, as one heard at that time in 2008 and 9, they got a piece of real estate in the harbor, which was very, very prime. And they set up a base and claimed themselves that up to 10,000 Marines can be positioned there. Can you imagine that in 2017, such a short period, in 2017, they sent 1 large expeditionary vessel full of Marines to commission that naval base. So it has been a God-sent opportunity which they have capitalized on. And they will never step back from an overseas military base. In fact, they are looking for more such bases around the world.
I think it's very interesting. Does India need to develop a naval base in the region? We have some facilities in Oman on the Dukum port. So looking at the long-term challenges and looking at our geopolitical and commercial interests, we probably need to step up our presence there rightly? And do we need to develop something much more seriously rather than just a commercial port like Chava or something like that? Do we need a naval base in the West Asian region?
The first thing is that there is a difference between bases and places. The Americans coined this term, comparative term of places or bases and places and bases. We have always depended upon places based on MOUs which are open like white papers. So we've had bilateral agreements with a large number of countries in the Indian Ocean and even in the parts of Pacific, where diplomatic clearances are sought and very quickly granted for operational turnaround of naval vessels when they have to visit either at short notice or for flag showing or for just goodwill visits. So we send our ships regularly on overseas deployments, but we are so far, and I think rightly so, because of the experience that we saw between the um, Cold War opponents, um, each vying against the other for a base, whether in the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic or the Pacific. We were totally against this kind of a proposition. And therefore, we have depended upon places. That means that you visit for either flag showing or for your exercises, bilateral or multilateral, and you are granted rights to do operational turnaround, which includes fuel, fresh rations, R&R, rest and recreation for your crew, change around, and look after maintenance issues of ships and come out. So we haven't really ever sought bases because that becomes an eyesore in the eyes of everybody else in the world. People see you with suspicion. Your own friends stop depending upon you. We have been against it. Now, insofar as China is concerned, they are going places in order to grab bases. Um, Gwadar is not too far away,
Yes.
and I feel that Gwadar will probably become a province of China if they are lucky, because the Pakistanis do not have um, even a percentile proportion of a fraction of what is being spent by the Chinese in developing that commercial port.
Looking at the long-term threat perception in maritime domain, would it be wise for the policy planners in India to revise the doctrine and not just look at places, but look at places to find a secure base? Because the needs of the country, the security threats, they change over a period of time. So a doctrine that was very useful in, let's say, 50, 60 years time may not be that useful in next 50 or 100 years time, considering the nature of the threat that is emerging, maritime threat.
On a very personal note, Dr. Adityanjee, I would say it is a good proposition. But if the thing is that people see you with suspicion. So if there is a particular state that invites you because it fears for its own defense and invites you to keep presence by creating facilities at India's cost, not at their cost, but they provide you a piece of their territory, a piece of not sovereignty, but a piece of their real estate in order to create facilities for them as well. Most certainly, I agree with you, because then what happens is that the school students' compass or divider, which at the moment is centered on mainland India or peninsular India, that gets shifted and expanded. It gets shifted from India to within somewhere else in the Indian Ocean and gets expanded for its radius of, I wouldn't call it influence, but action against natural and man-made disasters to assist all the have-nots within the Indo-Pacific, not just the Indian Ocean. So if that happens, by all means, if somebody invites, but on our own, we should not be making forays, because then you are seen with suspicion as if you are, you are trying to overstep over somebody else's sovereignty.
So let's say in a hypothetical scenario, country that is not recognized by India offers to give naval facilities, a port for development, which could be developed into an Indian naval base. Should India be interested to pursue that proposal?
I think a country that is not recognized or doesn't, where we do not have full diplomatic relations because of political reasons, because of historical reasons, because of pressures, may be too far away, and therefore too expensive to maintain. Also because I must also here remind myself more than you that there was an emergency committee of the cabinet after the 62 debacle, which had over a period of a year plus presented to the Prime Minister and his cabinet a plan for the three wings of the defense forces in order not to have a situation like the 1962 war, and in order to be self-sufficient in defense of India. That paper laid down certain force levels which must be acquired in the shortest possible time. And this was presented in 1963 or early 64 in behind closed doors, because it was highly confidential. However, over a period of time, the numbers have become well known. Those numbers for the Air Force and the Navy have still not been achieved, you can imagine. For the Army, they have been achieved insofar as boots on the ground are concerned, only because there has been internal security obligations, as you know, starting with the late 80s, and in one part of India, and therefore the number of the manpower strength had to go up. Only because of that compulsion, the Army was able to achieve those numbers which were indicated. The Air Force, as you know, has been crying hoarse over the fact that they were supposed to have a certain number, 42 or 45 squadrons. They haven't reached. They haven't even been able to breach 32 because, and the same is the case with the Navy, because the number of depletions or decommissioning of squadrons and ships per year has been more than the number of accretions or additions. And this is because sufficient capital allocation has not been possible for successive governments because of needs of other developmental areas for the population, for poverty alleviation, and so on and so forth. Now, when we compare that to the second largest economy in the world, we are nowhere insofar as numbers and capability is concerned. In fact, they are catching up. They have already superseded the numbers of the largest so far superpower, that is the US Navy. So we require numbers when it comes to not only stepping out of the Indian Ocean is concerned, but also within the Indian Ocean. We require numbers for mission-based deployments. We haven't got those numbers. So to maintain and sustain so far away will be very difficult. But I would suggest that instead of going to that kind of a length, there are many other friends in that region which require our assistance. One of those we have been supporting for a long time for various reasons, not just political reasons. One of those would be a good idea because it has been offering facilities for turnaround in its southern portion as well as northern portion. That will be a very good option to exercise rather than somewhere where full diplomatic relations have not been obtained.
The plan has a plan
Yes.
to be TSN.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Plan to be TSN, 1,000 ships navy.
Yes.
That is what a TSN is.
Yes.
And at this point in time, in terms of numbers of vessels, they are the largest. They have surpassed United States in number of
That's
naval
right.
assets.
That's right.
Around 2009, Hu Jintao had given an open call to plan to be able to guard China's quote unquote ocean sovereignty. That time they were negotiating a pace with, I believe, it's Seychelles at that point in time. And around the same time, by an executive order, China started retrofitting merchant vessels for dual use. Now, considering the resource crunch, would Indian Navy consider adding to its capability by retrofitting the merchant vessels for dual use when push comes to shove?
A very good idea. And this idea actually was exercised in almost every exercise. These days we call it the tropics, once in 2 years. But every exercise that we did in this after the 71 war naval exercise, we used to hire one of the vessels from the Shipping Corporation of India. And the Shipping Corporation used to be always short of vessels, just like the Indian Navy. So it used to complain that, look, I cannot spare a vessel for this kind of a thing because we are a commercial organization, even though we are a PSU, but we cannot be diverting resources which are so critically required for our company. And therefore, they used to give one of the very old vessels. But our idea was to carry out an exercise and find out lessons learned. How will we use logistical transportation resources when it comes to a conflict situation? Now, we have been exploring the possibility of converting merchant vessels into logistic support vessels. Unfortunately, that has not been um, really been practicable till now. Firstly, because we would rather have a logistic support ship which has got the capability of underway replenishment. If you do not have underway replenishment facilities, which means that they have got specialized naval types of derricks which fan out, and you both vessels continue to make headway in order not to be stopped and become targets for submarines of the opponent, um, and carry out transfer of fuel as well as other logistic items. Now we have acquired two very modern logistic support ships in the last decade from Fincantieri in Italy, where we gave the basic concept design and they developed on the full engineering design and then constructed those ships. There are two more which are in the offing. And in fact, the Indian Navy have been asking for a fleet of logistic support ships. in order to support our task forces, not just fleets, not just the Western and Eastern fleets. So it's not been a very practicable idea to convert merchant ships into logistic support ships. But I can assure you that not only from our experience in exercises which we carry out every now and then, that when push comes to shove, it is not just one odd merchant ship, but a large number of ships which will be leased with the assistance of the government from private companies and public sector undertakings, which will be utilized without wearing the naval ensign or the government ensign, so that they are not identifiable by the opponent, which will be utilized for what we call packet or brick transfer from place A to place B, so that war fighting can be supported.
Coming back again to the Red Sea conundrum, we are not the net safety provider in the region, but we are a positive regional safety provider. We are taking that role, and that is being appreciated by everyone. We talked about Djibouti, we talked about Gwadar. Again, it's an idea to maybe have a facility, whether we call it a place or a base or R&R facility in Somaliland, a country that we don't recognize, sits there. Any comments?
I don't think it would be a very good idea because, since 2002, in fact, since 1992, when trouble initially started off in Somalia, since that time, there have been a large number of UN resolutions. One of them in the year 2008 or 9 even permitted any country to intervene and not that it will not be considered violation of their integrity and sovereignty, intervene by stepping into their territory in order to retrieve any assets that have been seized by non-state actors and so on who are operating out of Somalia. And yet we did not step into that country. The French did very successfully at one stage when one of their $1 million club cruise vessels was hijacked, and they sent 2 of their ships, which sent out helicopters and even carried out assault on Somali territory against those hijackers. It will not be a very good idea because, unfortunately, because of the circumstances in that country, political and economic, since the late 90s and particularly since 2002, that even fishermen have turned themselves into pirates for over a decade. It will be a very unstable environment and a very, very risky proposition. So creating anything over there will not be a success for us. It may be a success for a country which can throw away large amount of doles and create employment opportunities by creating malls, by creating bases where the local population can again find breadwinners within their families.
Thank you very much indeed, Admiral Anup Singh, for this conversation. It was highly enlightening, and we hope that you will continue to grace our platform in future as well to discuss maritime challenges that we face in the very complex international environment at this point in time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. With great pleasure. With great pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee.
Okay. We will be ending this session now.
Thank you.